It happened in the 8th inning. Not the first. Not in some early, low-stakes moment when the score was lopsided and the tension hadn't yet reached the kind of temperature that makes rational men do irrational things. It happened in the 8th inning of a game that mattered, between two franchises that have never needed much encouragement to remind each other of exactly how much they dislike sharing the same sport. 3 Yankees players. One moment. And Shohei Ohtani at the center of it. When the dust settled, when the umpires restored order and the benches finally cleared back to their respective dugouts and the stadium noise dropped from something primal back to something merely loud, the baseball world had a new story. Not the kind of story that gets filed under routine and forgotten by the weekend. The kind of story that gets replayed, dissected, argued over, and remembered. Because when 3 players from one team converge on one player from another team, when that convergence happens in the 8th inning of a game with stakes attached, and when the player at the center of it is Shohei Ohtani, the story doesn't stay inside the stadium. It goes everywhere. The game had been building towards something all night. That is what the people who were there said afterward, in the specific way that people describe moments of eruption once they have the benefit of knowing how things ended. The tension was visible in the first inning. The body language between the two dugouts carried an edge that the box score couldn't capture. There were looks held a beat too long. There were words exchanged at the margins of plays that the microphones didn't catch but the players absolutely heard. Yankees and Dodgers games carry a particular kind of weight that most regular season matchups simply don't produce. It isn't manufactured. It doesn't require a playoff context to feel significant. The history between these two franchises is old enough and layered enough that it generates its own gravity, the kind that pulls players toward a version of themselves that is slightly more combustible than usual, slightly less willing to absorb the small provocations that accumulate over the course of 9 innings. By the 8th inning, the accumulation had reached its limit. Ohtani was at the plate. The at-bat had been contested from the first pitch, not violently, not obviously, but in the way that the most meaningful at-bats always are. Every pitch a negotiation. Every swing a statement. Every foul ball an extension of a conversation that both sides understood was about more than just one plate appearance in one regular season game. And then it escalated. What happened in those seconds, the specific sequence of events that transformed a baseball game into something else entirely, is the kind of thing that witnesses describe differently depending on where they were standing and what they were watching in the moment it began. What is not in dispute is the result. 3 Yankees players were involved. 3 men from the same dugout, wearing the same uniform, making the same decision in the same compressed window of time that leaves almost no room for the rational part of the brain to intervene before the body has already committed to a direction. Ohtani was the target. That fact alone, separate from everything else, stripped of context and pre-game history and 8th inning score and accumulated tension, that fact alone is the thing that made this different from the ordinary baseball altercation that flares up and fades out and gets a 2-sentence mention in the game recap. You do not go after Shohei Ohtani. That is not a rule written anywhere. It is not in the rulebook or the collective bargaining agreement or any official document that governs the sport. But it is understood. In the same way that certain things are understood in any environment where hierarchies of importance exist, some actions carry consequences that extend beyond the immediate moment, and some targets, when chosen, transform a conflict into something with a much longer tail. The Yankees chose that target. 3 of them. In the 8th inning. In front of a full stadium and every camera that covers a game of this magnitude. The consequences were going to be significant. Everyone in that building knew it the moment it happened. Dave Roberts was in the dugout when it started. He has managed enough baseball, enough late innings, enough high-leverage moments, enough situations where the atmosphere in a stadium shifts from competitive to something more dangerous, to recognize what he was seeing before most people in the building had processed what was happening. He moved. The coaches moved. The Dodgers players who were closest to the field moved with the specific urgency of men who understood that what was happening to their teammate required a response that went beyond verbal. The benches cleared. That phrase gets used so routinely in baseball coverage that it has almost lost its meaning, but the reality of a bench-clearing incident in the 8th inning of a Yankees-Dodgers game, with 3 players already involved and Ohtani at the center of it, was not routine in any sense that the phrase typically implies. It was controlled chaos. The kind where everyone is moving at once but the movements have a logic to them, a direction, a purpose, even when that purpose is simply to place bodies between a situation and the point at which it becomes something that cannot be walked back. The umpires were in the middle of it. Security was moving. The stadium noise had become a single sustained roar that made individual voices impossible to separate from the collective sound of thousands of people reacting to the same thing simultaneously. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, Ohtani. What Ohtani did in those moments revealed something that the people who watch him closely have understood for a while now, but that the broader baseball audience doesn't always get the chance to see directly. He didn't escalate. He didn't reach for the kind of response that 3-on-1 situations sometimes pull out of men who are otherwise composed, the reactive, adrenaline-driven answer that makes sense in the moment and creates problems for weeks afterward. He stood his ground in the way that genuinely strong people stand their ground. Not by matching the energy coming at him. Not by making the situation larger than it already was. But by being, in the middle of something chaotic, a version of himself that was impossible to rattle. That composure, that specific, almost unsettling calm in a moment designed to produce its opposite, is the thing that the cameras captured and the thing that people kept returning to when they watched the footage afterward. 3 players came at him. And Ohtani, in the way that Ohtani handles most things that are designed to destabilize him, simply refused to be destabilized. The Dodgers around him were not as calm. Nor should they have been. The job of teammates in a moment like that is not to mirror the composure of the man being targeted. It is to make clear, physically and unambiguously, that what just happened to one of them happened to all of them. That message was delivered. The ejections came. Several of them. The Yankees players involved were removed from the game with the efficiency of a process that has been applied to baseball conflicts for as long as the sport has existed. The umpires conferred. The official reports were begun. The machinery of league discipline, which moves slowly and deliberately and with the particular kind of institutional weight that professional sports organizations bring to bear when an incident reaches a certain threshold, was set in motion. By the time the stadium returned to something resembling order, the game had lost whatever remained of its previous shape. The 8th inning continued, technically. The score still mattered, technically. The 9 innings that baseball requires were going to be completed because that is what the sport demands regardless of what happens inside them. But the game everyone was watching was no longer the game on the field. It was the game that would be played over the next several days, in league offices and press conferences and the constant, churning media environment that surrounds events of this magnitude and refuses to let them settle until every angle has been examined and every consequence has been assigned. The Yankees organization would have to answer for what their players did. Not in the abstract way that organizations sometimes answer for things they didn't directly sanction, but specifically, on the record, in front of microphones, with the footage playing on a loop behind them. The Dodgers would have to decide how to respond. Publicly, carefully, with the awareness that what they said would shape the narrative of this incident for as long as the narrative remained alive. And the players involved, all of them, on both sides of the field, would carry what happened in that 8th inning into every subsequent game between these two franchises, perhaps for the remainder of the season. Baseball has a memory. It is one of the oldest things about the sport. Slights are recorded. Conflicts are catalogued. And when 2 teams meet again after something like this, the history is present in the dugout before the first pitch is thrown. Robert spoke after the game with the measured clarity of a man who had seen what happened, understood what it meant, and was not going to say more than the moment required. He confirmed what everyone already knew. He used the word unacceptable. He did not use it loudly or theatrically. Roberts almost never reaches for volume when precision will do the same job. He said it the way a person says something they mean completely and don't need to repeat. What happened to Ohtani in the 8th inning was unacceptable. The league would respond. The Dodgers expected that response to be serious. And Ohtani? He was fine. That was the word Roberts used. Fine. Which, in the specific language of post-game press conferences after incidents like this one, means, present, unhurt, and already thinking about the next game. Because that is who Ohtani is. Not just the player at the center of this story. Not just the name that transformed a baseball altercation into a moment the sport would spend days processing. He is the man who stood in the middle of the 8th inning while 3 players from the other team made a decision they would immediately regret, and refused, completely and without visible effort, to become anything other than exactly himself. The stadium saw it. The cameras recorded it. The baseball world spent the rest of the night talking about it. And Ohtani went home and prepared for tomorrow. That, more than anything else that happened in that 8th inning, was the part of the story that no one could quite get over.